ಉಸಿರಿಟ್ಟವಳೆ ತುಟಿಗೆ ಕರುಣೆ ಮುತ್ತು ನಿನ್ನ ವಾತ್ಸಲ್ಯ ಗುಬ್ಬಿ ಗೊರವಂಕಕ್ಕೂ ಗೊತ್ತು ಬಿಸಿಲಿಗೆ ಒಣಗಿದ ಗಂಟಲು ಬಾಯೆನ್ನುವ ಹೊತ್ತು ನಿನ್ನ ಕರುಳು ಕರಗಿ ಜೀವಧಾರೆ ಹರಿದಿತ್ತು ಅಮ್ಮ ಕಾವೇರಿ ಅಮ್ಮ ನೀನೆ ನಮ್ಮ ತಾಯಿ ಅಮ್ಮ ಕಾವೇರಿ ಅಮ್ಮ ನೀನೆ ನಮ್ಮ ತಾಯಿ ಶರಣು ಬಂದ ಕಂದರನ್ನ
We do this in association with Prabhakatan Foundation, SAS Women and the Spaggia Foundation. With us today we have Tarun, who's actually a lawyer and he graduated from Bangalore. And he's also a graduate from, how many degrees do you have? Indian School of Business in Hyderabad. And he's worked as a corporate lawyer and a chief operating officer for a sports marketing company. Okay, so many hats. And he's also a writer as well as he's looking after a startup right now. When do you get time to write?
Less and less now, unfortunately.
Come on, you've just begun. We will be speaking about his new book, which Akriti has read and has been very excited about. I think Akriti is known to everybody. She is also a lawyer and right now an educationist. I think a lot of us have our kids' futures all bundled up in her hands, in her expert hands. She's engaged in curriculum development and communications for the students of the Jaipur Periwal International School and is also a recipient of the Outstanding Educator Award by the University of Chicago and Naritwa Award by Jaipur Moms Community. Oh wow, are they that big?
After how many awards she has?
Lesser than you for sure.
And she's also recently acquired TEDx Youth License and her school received an award as the #1 college counseling cell in India. She also promotes art and culture as an honorary convener of the Prabhakatan Foundation International Affairs. With that, I'm going to leave the session and this evening to Tarun, Mehrishi and Akriti, but not before we give a typical Jaipur warm welcome to both our speakers.
Thank you so much, Meeta Auntie, for that beautiful introduction and for inviting me to be here. I had the pleasure of reading the book thanks to the event, and it's truly been some of the best hours that I've spent in recent times immersed into the pages. Our guest for this evening, Tarun Mehrishi, and our book is The Portrait of a Secret, which I have thoroughly enjoyed. Honestly, while reading the book, I was thinking about how it's really a canvas that juxtaposes fact with fiction. It's a tapestry that is woven with intricate detailing, but also has intriguing mystery in it. It's a gallery of layered characters and chapters. So The Portrait of a Secret is, I think, Tarun's masterpiece, where Indian history meets fiction, where world events collide with espionage thrilling tales, and where the story spanning a century slowly unfolds itself only to fold in the reader into its captivating plot twists and climax endings. My husband was traveling today for a couple of days and he's been telling me for the past few days, you've read half the book, now you can finish it later, but I said this is not possible because I really need to know the ending and how it happens. So that's an insight into how all of you are going to feel once you actually start reading the book. But we will not be giving any spoilers during the conversation, so we'll focus on letting that unfold when you read the book and on the writing process a little bit more. So Tarun, Meeta Auntie spoke about the multiple hats you wear, and I absolutely agree, from being a lawyer to working as a sports marketer and then an entrepreneur with your own EV startup and an author. And I remember when the first time we spoke on the phone, you said this one line to me that I believe everyone has a story to tell. So I'm really intrigued by your story. What pushed you into becoming an author from all these diverse roles that you have actually previously held?
Firstly, Meeta ma'am, thank you so much for inviting me here today, and of course, Akriti, thank you. I'm going to give this as honest an answer as I can, right? Which is I've sort of flowed along with life. So law was actually quite a default option. I knew I was not going to do well in the 12th board examination. Some of us might remember that 2001 cricket series, India and Australia, that essentially cost me the board examinations. So law was the only viable option. And in 2001, it wasn't such a known or glamorous option as it might have turned out to be today. But it worked out well. I actually hated the law when I started practicing it, and that's only myself to blame. I chose the wrong stream of law to work in. Sports, as we say, keeda hamesha tha. So the move into sports was my choice. It was relatively easy. And again, it is by luck that I did manage to get a break in sports simply because the CEO of one company was hitting on a friend of mine at some bar. And so that's when God sort of smiling on you and making things happen for you. You got into sport, I worked in it for the last 12 or 13 years, and I've just moved on now because I'm a little bit bored of what was happening with the sports industry in India. And this entire space that I'm trying to work in now, of electric vehicles and where the Indian government is heading with its EV policies, is something that's exciting at the moment. But is it something that's going to define the rest of my life? I don't know. We will see if something else more interesting pops up. Writing actually emerged out of COVID. And if COVID had not happened, as unfortunate as those circumstances were, the book would never have been written. Sports actually died, right, almost instantly when COVID came around. There was no question of anybody playing any sport, doing anything constructive in the industry. So that freed up time for me, at least the first 6 or 8 weeks before we found our feet again, to try and write. And in those 6 or 8 weeks, this kernel of an idea had been in my head for many, many years. I actually managed to knock off a fair bit of the book in that first 8 weeks. And once you got there, you sort of feel, I'm here. I might as well now find a way to get this finished. So that's the most honest assessment of my story. At the ripe old age of 40, this is where we stand today.
Thank you. Very honest, very candid answer, and also very humble, because I don't know how many in the audience know that National Law School of Bangalore, you don't just get in by not doing well in grade 12 board exams. So thank you for that. You spoke that in 8 weeks you got most of this together, but from the perspective of a reader, I'll just give everybody a brief. So a small summary of the book would be that there are 2 paintings that are stolen from India, and they get highlighted for the Indian intelligence when there's an attempt to auction them off at Sotheby's. This is all I can tell you, I think, without giving away spoilers. But so these 2 paintings are actually critical to the story. They are central to the story. And as a reader, it was very intriguing to me. You've used art, and then there is this whole espionage thriller painted against a very vivid backdrop of a lot of historical events. So what led you to choose these 2 paintings as the cornerstone of the book?
So that idea actually came out of an article in one of our main lines. If I remember correctly, it was the Times of India at some point of time, but it was extensively covered as research subsequently showed. It is true that paintings were stolen from India. Over the next sort of 8 or 9 months, I realized that it's not just 2 paintings that have disappeared from India. We've lost God knows how many pieces of artwork from this country. And unfortunately, a lot of that money is routed in activities that are not in our interest. Right? So over my conversations with a couple of guys from the intelligence agencies, etc., they've been looking at this quite carefully, because stopping the funding against terror is perhaps the best way to stop terror against the country as well. So that's where it emerged from. And then there's a larger view that I hold, which is, unlike what Bollywood or Hollywood have led us to believe, that there is a superhero and a supervillain, I don't think life really works like that, right? Everybody is playing their respective roles within their constraints, their families, their pressures, whatever else it is, and stories emerge out of what everybody is doing as best as they can. Which is why there are these many characters in the book, each of which is trying to play the role that they are meant to play at that point in their life. So there's no larger sort of theme in there. That's really where it emerges from. Interestingly enough, the paintings are actually the least of this country's worries. Apparently what we've lost a lot of is statues, is a lot of metallurgical work that we'd done hundreds of years ago. And I don't think anybody in the country really has any track of how many billions worth of stuff we've lost over the last 50 years. fortunately now, from what I understand, we're clamping down quite hard on this, which is encouraging to hear.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that it was an article that led you into looking at these two paintings, and it was actually the book which led me into researching more about this painter, Nicholas Roerich, and I chanced upon the fact that he's the only non-Indian who's cited as amongst the 9 Navratnas of Indian art. So he's the Russian Navratna considered. So you've actually brought this jewel of information, I think, out for more of us to know. And there's a Roerich museum, which now I'm intrigued to go and visit, thanks to the book. But besides the art, coming to the history that we tap into in the book, it's a non-linear narrative that you followed, and there are so many significant moments that are brought about beautifully in the narrative, whether it's the Bolshevik Revolution, whether it's the bifurcation of Jammu and Kashmir, or the tumultuous birth of Bangladesh. So, was there a particular thought in mind when you were choosing these moments, or were these moments there and then you built them into the narrative? How was this process? Because history has so much, so I was very interested to know what led you to bring in these moments into your narrative.
So it flows not from these events having existed, of course it does flow from that, but it's a question of getting into the skin of each character and figuring what events might have transpired in their lives that they might have been involved in, or could theoretically have been involved in. Not all of it is true, it is of course a work of fiction. So if you take the example of Roerich, he was alive at the time of partition, he was alive when Jammu and Kashmir was going through all the trouble it was going through, and he was in India at that point of time, so he would actually seen this happen as it went, right? He was in Kashmir for a long time, it is eminently possible he was friends with the Raja of Kashmir at that point of time. Likewise, if you look at the story of Chief of Intelligence, he's obviously had a career spanning multiple decades. And in his life, the person I had in my mind when I wrote the character, in his life he would certainly have seen the creation of Bangladesh, the birth of Bangladesh. He would have seen Operation Blue Star. He would have seen a bunch of these other events that are then mentioned in the book, right? And he would have been involved by the time he came to a level of seniority where he would actually be the man tasked with finding a way to recover these paintings and stop the terrorist attack against India. So it's the lens of what a character might experience that allows you to build in layers, not necessarily the layers themselves that come first and then you build characters around them.
Absolutely. And speaking about these layers, it's not just the layers of different historical moments or these paintings. There are different geographical locations along with the time zones that the book actually brings out, and yet when you follow the narrative, it's very cohesive and you feel like you're a part of the story, you feel like you're a passenger and you're actually shifting from one time zone to the other time zone and the story's unfolding before you. So as an author, was this something that was one of the most challenging parts about the book? I don't know, it was, you go from 1919 to 2010. So was this something which you found to be a little bit of a task? Were there moments where you almost gave up?
So the second answer first, which is yes. There were certainly moments when you always give up, and I've said this before. Partly it is the fact that you are so far into the book that you really want to finish it. Partly it is the biwi ka danda. Okay, itna time lagaya hai, so now you better well finish this. So thanks to Asta for that. But this moving around time zones and various parts of history, yes, it's challenging, it's complicated. There were a lot of errors in the beginning of the book. What really simplified it was writing each story independently and then trying to put them together. But of course, in the course of that, you suddenly find that by virtue of how you've written it, you find that Amitabh was probably like 4 years old when Operation Blue Star happened. So then you need to revise that entire section again and try and bring it into line with whatever you're trying to say. And huge credit to Gurveen, who was my editor at Penguin, who picked out a lot of these date errors towards the end and helped rectify them. But as long as you sort of deal with those stories independently and then put them together, those crossovers are fewer and easier to handle.
At the end of the book, you also talk about extensive feedback that you received. So a lot of the feedback would have required you to go back and do these timeline changes and so on and so forth also. So was that something at times you were like, why did I ask?
Yeah, it can. So this, the final manuscript that got submitted to Penguin was version 73. right?
Oh,
So it does get immensely frustrating after a point of time, and actually it's all the publisher is doing at the end of it, because the publisher will give you a final date saying, look, submit the manuscript by this date, otherwise we're not doing this project. So that puts it to a close. Otherwise, I think most authors would say that they could keep rewriting parts of their book till every word was perfect, but that's an endless journey. It can never really be finished.
So, like we spoke about earlier, there's a lot of fiction in the book, and there's also historical facts. So, there are real life figures that have been skillfully incorporated into the book. So, whether it's somebody from the Indian cinema, one of our famous actresses, or the demise of an Indian Prime Minister, which never really came to an end. We never got a real answer for that. So while writing this book, how did you really strike a balance between that historical authenticity, historical fidelity, and creative freedom? Where did you decide to take that creative freedom, and where did you decide to stick to the facts?
So my disclaimer on this always is that this is a work of fiction, right? It's not a work of history, which gives me a little bit more creative liberty than, of course, a work of history would have. The question of fidelity is quite challenging, because the expansion and the layers require some flexibility with the truth. My effort and my attempt has been not to mislead, not to demean, not to lie about anything that happened. But for example, in the case of that Prime Minister, there is a lot of debate about how he actually died. Right? So you can play that out in multiple ways without necessarily tarnishing his achievements or his reputation in any which way. I'm just trying to find the right words for it. I think it actually does just boil down to that eventually, that you are trying not to defame anybody who has been a real historical character, but as long as that line is maintained, there is some freedom that might be permitted to an author to expand the horizons of what that character might have experienced. So that's the way I dealt with it, and I'd like to believe, at least, and hopefully you agree, having read the book, that nobody has been cast in a bad light.
Absolutely, and I also loved at the end that lawyer within you was visible in the disclaimer, which is very beautifully put out in the book. But Tarun, the book also gives us a very detailed insight into how intelligence agencies operate, the workings of, say, an auction house like Sotheby's. The process is very detailed, and it's very vividly described for the reader to know. Whether it comes to the life of the Russian painter Roerich, or the onset moments of a production house in Indian cinema. So all these things they have a lot of factual information that has been put out there. And you mentioned that you wrote this book in COVID. So what was the research process that you kind of undertook? Were there limitations that you faced in your research because of COVID? Or do you think that everybody being available that time and Zoom calls, was it easy for you to contact people in the intelligence agencies or perhaps at museums to understand all of this a little more?
So I started writing it in COVID, but it took me 2 years. So I had time, once COVID was done and dusted with, that I actually got the opportunity to meet some people and have a physical discussion with them and how it works. So the parts about the intelligence world come out of two things. Firstly, what I have read through my life, which has always been this genre for the most part. My buas here, my buas gifted me a lot of better literature, but that tends to lie ignored on one side while I finish my Clancy's and Wilbur Smiths and whatever else it is. So part of it comes from there. Part of it comes from the fact that my parents are from a bureaucratic background, so they know people in the intelligence world. We've sort of grown up with some of these people. So having a conversation with them allows one to understand how they think, how their world really works. Although I must say they are exceptionally cagey even after retirement, so they're willing to say very, very little. The research, this is the one point in my life where the legal training has really come in handy. In law, you're forced to deal with subjects you know nothing about and sort of become relative experts in those subjects. You're able to sit for long hours, you're able to figure it out from secondary sources and learn yourself. And that's really what's helped try and bring some of that honesty into how processes work into this book as well. Are the Sotheby's processes accurate? I'm glad you think they are, but I don't know for a fact that that's exactly how Sotheby's would run it. But the idea, of course, is just to build a narrative that is believable, not necessarily one that's absolutely accurate.
You mentioned how being a lawyer helped you in some of it because that's what you were exposed to. So when it came to so many of the other hats that you've worn that we spoke about earlier, that of being an entrepreneur, that of being a sports marketing person, do you think that any of these fields helped you when you were writing the book?
I'm going to give that a bit of a philosophical answer, which is, whoever you are at whatever point of stage or at your point of life, it is a combination of all the experiences you've been through. So of course, there will be an element of sports marketing, of entrepreneurship that has gone into me being me today, for better or for worse. And that sort of then flows into the book as well and everything else you do in life. But no sports marketing skills really, I think, are transferable into this. I could argue perhaps that I understand something about marketing and therefore I'm able to put something in terms of presentation into this book, but that's not a genuine answer. It is just a combination of expressing who you really are as a result of all your experiences in life.
So, and you've done the sports marketing a bit before, but now after having authored the book and gone through the process, now you're probably in the stages of marketing the book. So how has this experience been for you?
This is the most torturous experience of authoring a book, right? So you are an unknown entity in the world, in the country, even within your own circles, to so to speak. So just getting the word out in a very competitive environment is a really hard ask. The really hard learning, and I have nothing but respect for Penguin, but I'm sure this is true for every publisher, is that you get basically zero support. Once the book is done, it's on you to figure out what you can do. So marketing a book once you're done with it is actually very, very hard. And it's quite hard to keep motivated for a long period of time and to try and keep doing stuff, even though you don't always see results. So, not fun.
You can tap into Meeta Auntie's extensive experience in this field post the session.
Yes. I think there's actually a business opportunity around this as well, which I'm going to think about at some point of time.
That's the entrepreneur in you speaking now.
Yes.
I actually chanced upon one of your interviews where you talked about, Chanakya and how his belief about intelligence gathering actually may influence modern day narrative and intelligence gathering today. Even in the book, when we go through the pages and chapter by chapter, you see that unfold. You see your focus on India's intelligence gathering. So that's one of the key parts of the narrative of the book. So what is your take on where this is going in the future? And do you think that that focus on Arthashastra is there? What's your opinion on that?
So I think what I did say was, the question asked to me then was, in India's historical context, has intelligence been as important as it is today? And I had the pleasure of doing a history project on the Arthashastra, so I knew something about that. And Chanakya had said in his writings, right, that there's a lot of space dedicated to the importance of a kingdom, of a king knowing what is going on in his kingdom and on the world around him. And I can't imagine it being truer today than it was then, especially given where India is today on the international stage, what we're trying to accomplish with the G20, establish our position, the kind of money that we are now able to afford to put into our intelligence services, the interest that we have across the world, right? We are no longer a meek Asian power that is sitting back and waiting for things to happen. We have global aspirations, we do have interests across the world that we are trying to protect, to grow. Intelligence is perhaps the most important thing that we can do today, along with what Mr. Jaishankar is doing in terms of foreign policy. So absolutely, I mean, key to what India is hoping to do going forward. Of course, there's a lot more to it, but certainly this will be one of the most important things that we do going forward. What the Chinese have done for the last 40 years, right? Building on their intelligence, they managed to build an economy that is something to be envious of.
Absolutely. And speaking of going forward, where do you see yourself continuing in the same space in the world of espionage thrillers? Do you want to explore any other genre? We've all spent a lot of time immersed into the pages of James Patterson or Tom Clancy and Robert Ludlum, and they've all been in one particular space, one particular genre. But what is your take on your future as an author? Is there a plan? Are we going to see more series with the same protagonist?
So firstly, on James Patterson, Tom Clancy, etc., these guys are absolute geniuses, right? To be able to put out a book every 6 months, every 12 months, which is selling 1 million copies is a remarkable feat in itself. I don't know how they do it, but it's a most remarkable achievement. They run a factory of other authors that write for them, but nevertheless to be able to edit to this level and keep it consistent is still quite a remarkable achievement. I think I'm going to write at least one more in this genre. I do want to write something about the sports industry. I have a lot to say about it, but I don't have the courage yet to write about the people that matter in the sports industry. So I'm trying to find that courage. I do want to write a work in the science fiction space, which again I think is something that Indian authors have basically not tried for the most part. Then I can't really think of a science fiction book that's made any dent in the literary space from India. Maybe Meetan can think of something. Okay, maybe that. Yes. So there's an entire genre that's relatively open, and I do have an idea that I want to try and build. But it's a very ambitious project. It's a really hard thing to do because you are writing about stuff that you've never seen, never thought of, building an entire world, which is quite a remarkably difficult task. But the second book will certainly be in this genre. The third book, hopefully, about the sports industry. And then we'll see. Then we'll see.
And interestingly, the rights for the movie have already been bought for Portrait of a Secret. So I think we're all going to see it on the big screen. When it does come on...
I want to push for the OTT series, although the cover does say to be on a big screen soon. But I think it's more suited to OTT than it is to a movie. That's my personal view.
And if given your choice of pick from the industry, who would you choose to play the central character in the story? Who would be Amitabh?
So having watched Special Ops and the job that KK did within that, he has got to be the one that plays Amitabh if we have that kind of flexibility to get a man like him. For the other characters, I haven't really thought about it to date. KK is the one name that's stuck in my head given the stunning show that Special Ops was. Yeah, so let's see. Not my call, I get nothing, I have nothing to do with the way they interpret the book or the way they make this show. I've basically been told, you signed an agreement, now please sit back, and if you are required, we'll call you.
Absolutely, and just like KK and Special Ops, even in the book, Amitabh is a very layered character. He's not black and white, there are multiple hues of grey that come out. So was that a purposeful move to actually, kind of humanize the trials and tribulations and the decisions that people have to make to navigate through all that life offers? Or was that just something that while building the storyline naturally happened for you?
So it wasn't a conscious effort, but like I said, right, no character is black or white. All of us sitting here also have our shades of grey, whatever they might be for each individual person. And Salman Khan from Pathan or Shah Rukh Khan from Pathan does not exist in real life. You need a far more layered character that's actually doing the job that's required to be done.
Absolutely. And you talked about all this background and passion that you've had always in this genre and always been into history. So were there some key aspects that you thought would make it to the book, key moments of history that you thought would make it to the narrative, but you had to take that choice, you had to make that choice to leave them out?
Maybe a few that I might have built in otherwise, but I actually am quite an unstructured author. Like, I didn't have a plan when I started writing. You start writing and then you're figuring out what layers add value to what you've done up to that point of time. But at some point I was toying with the idea of bringing in India's space program. There's so much that's happened in the last 70 years of India's independence as well, right? But yes, at some point we make the choice saying that's pushing it too far, that's expanding the canvas too wide, and we will stick to things that meaningfully can be interpreted as being potentially honest in the experience that the characters would have had. And that's really the choices that have been made at that point of time. But this could have been a 400-page book. You can add a lot more events into it since you're talking about intelligence that encompasses everything that the country does. So it could have been a lot bigger, but not this time.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of information about the bureaucracy that comes in. So where does that connect to that information? Where does that connect to actually having that knowledge about how the bureaucracy works? Where did that come from for you?
And the most honest, the truth is ghar se, which is my parents are both bureaucrats. So I've seen them, between the two of them, work for 80 years. And all my life, the only people we've met through them have been bureaucrats and people that work in the government. So the way they dress, the way they talk, it's actually quite similar to each other. So that is the easiest part for me to write because that's something I've seen for 40 years.
Thank you, and I think very, very interesting in the book is how you kind of navigate between showing the real bureaucracy in India, where your characters also have to, they go through that thought process about having to navigate for a certain situation, red tapeism, or having to take that decision that should I make this effort or not make this effort, and then that effort is made. So that those are probably decisions that happen on a real time. But when it comes to the historical moments in the book also, for example, we tap into the thought process of the Raja, before the key document. So that is also very beautifully portrayed. The decision-making process that he goes through, the thoughts in his head, kind of the bylanes of his decision, how he took it, what were the negatives and positives? Was that a purposeful move by you to showcase the awareness of how much importance these certain moments played in history? Or
I think it's more a question of building a real conversation, right? When you're talking, two friends talking would talk quite honestly in the way they're thinking about whatever the situation that is facing them is. And I'm sure the situation was a lot more complicated than I've been able to bring out in this book. But it is the hardest conversation I've written in that book because God only knows what pressures he was under at that point of time. It's also really hard to go back and write conversations or scenes that are set in history that you have not lived. Anything before the year I was born, for example, is very, very hard to write. As an illustration, there's a scene where we have a guard walking around the building and securing it. But in that year, would a guard have had a transistor or would he have had a mobile phone, right? So that's the kind of stuff you have to be very careful about. And in the case of the Raja in the 40s, in 47, he must have been pressured from across the world. And of course, a man is struggling with that answer in a seminal question that affects millions of lives. He is bound to ask that question of a bunch of people that he trusts. But to build out that conversation was quite an interesting and hard task.
absolutely, and I think that speaking about the transistor from the guard's hands, how technology progresses in the book too. We go from that to actually showcasing how how technology in the hands of our intelligence agencies is probably a lot more advanced than any of us can fathom. So that also speaks to, especially young readers, I think, to understand how strong the nation has become when it comes to those services. And I think authors like you hold such a strong power in shaping the minds of these young readers, because there are so many beautiful career options that can be there for the smartest and brightest of our country to pick up these positions. So do you think in your work in the future you would want to showcase these assets of our country to tap into actually showcasing the positive strengths of our bureaucracy, of our intelligence services a little more, using espionage thriller as a medium?
Yeah, absolutely. For the bureaucracy, it's often abused and accused of being inefficient and lazy. And it's a broad brush that we paint all bureaucrats with. Of course, it's true in some parts, but there are a lot of hardworking bureaucrats. You don't become the world's fifth largest economy just by virtue of living a life. Somebody has played an important role in making that happen over a period of time. Bad decisions are made, good decisions are made, all of that plays out. I think there are a lot of jobs that are going to emerge in the tech space, especially to do with espionage, with technology, with intelligence. The problem really is that nobody's going to tell you what technology exists today. Right? The entire debate we had about Pegasus, whether it's true, not true, nobody's ever going to give you a clear answer on that. So it's always going to be a work of fiction as to what exists and what might exist in the future. But ultimately, I think it boils down to money. It's nothing more. We obviously got the tech jobs to build out whatever we want to build out. It's just a question of having the GDP power to be able to invest the resources that we need to. And now we're getting to a stage where we have the money that can actually help our intelligence services become better than they were. So hopefully we'll see a lot more of that happening now in the next few years.
And honestly, for all of you out there, Tarun mentioned earlier that he's an unstructured writer and he's an unstructured author. When you read the book, you're going to think that he was definitely lying today, because the complexity of the narrative, the timelines, the geographical locations, and the historical events that he taps into so beautifully, and then it's all woven into one single fabric, and it all falls into place just like a click. And it's not easy to accomplish that to be very honest, when I was thinking about your writing process, I was imagining how, in an agency, they have this big board and there are different threads connecting different timelines and different narratives and different plots. That's probably, I thought, what you must have done. There must have been newspaper clippings and, like a whole vision board was in my head for your writing process.
I'll be honest, I actually tried to draw it out on a piece of paper, but it made no sense to me on that piece of paper. So we left that aside. But I must thank a lot of people that have been involved in that entire process, right? By myself, there would have been an enormous number of errors in this book. But I'm blessed that I have some friends from college who, despite their busy schedules, took time out to actually read the book and point out a bunch of errors that existed. And like I said, the editor, the proofreaders, all of them have caught so many of these date errors. Right at the end of the book, there's an interrogation scene, right? Where a question is being asked of the person being interrogated, to which he should not know the answer at that point of time. And that's something that the editor caught. I had missed it entirely. It's what's that famous saying, right? It's easy to miss the wood for the forest, or however that goes. And it's really, when you're involved and in deep with that book, it's very hard to zoom out and figure out whether that conversation is real at that point of time or not. So it's certainly not a single person's process. It requires 5 or 6 other sets of eyes to read it with the same love that you are putting into it. Upar se to koi bhi padh leta hai, but that doesn't achieve anything for you. So if anybody is writing, please find 5 people who are going to read the book for you.
Thank you so much, Tarun. It's truly been my joy to have read this book and to be in conversation with you. I could keep having that conversation, and I've already stolen your time enough. So now I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions.
Conversation. And actually you've taken up at least 4 or 5 of my questions already. Okay, I got them answered. The only thing which is left for me now is to ask is whether you've been a corporate guy for a long time. So did this, writing a book and obviously the process which goes after the publishing of it, was it like, sort of when you have a marketing strategy, did you devise a strategy, or did you think, okay, this is how the book is going to be written and how it's going to be published? And obviously it might have got in your mind because you have been living it for quite many years. So does it happen like that, or did it happen like that?
So again, the most honest answer is I've been unusually blessed from what I hear from other authors as well. How did this book get published? When you're writing it, your only sort of dream at that point of time is that, one, I want to finish it, which is an achievement in itself. But the mind's a greedy place. So once you sort of finish the manuscript, you're like, let's try and get it published. Once you get it published, you're like, yeah, publish okay, let's try and sell some copies. You sell some copies, now you're like, let's try and make it a national bestseller. So it never ends. So setting these plans and stuff, it doesn't really work, I think. At least with the first book, it's not worked. I'm wiser for the experience now. So for the second book, I'll have a better idea of what I want to do once it's been published. But the amount of luck that's gone into getting published is also something to be spoken about. So I found an agent only because she was married to a batchmate of mine from college who I had not spoken to in 10 years. Right? They moved to Singapore. I reached out on LinkedIn and she was kind enough to say, I'm happy to read this manuscript. What she did tell me on that first conversation was, nobody reads fiction in India, so it's very, very hard to get published. She sent it to one publisher, which was Penguin. She refused to tell me the name at that point of time, and Goodwin was happy to pick it up. But at any of those stages, if it had not gone forward, it probably would not have happened. So in that context, setting plans would have been relatively meaningless. I'm actually now trying to put some plans in place, 6 months after the book has been published, now that I know what reality looks like for an author.
So you were destined to just write it and let it happen?
Yeah, absolutely. It was that, let's say Kira tha again, at some point we'll get it done. If fortuitous that COVID came around, you had some free time, you got 60% of it done. And then once it's done, you're like, let us at least give it a shot to get it published. So the initial feedback from friends and family is always very, very biased. But kahin andar se bhi awaaz aati hai that you've done a relatively good job. So let's see what the world outside has to say about it.
Great. Hope you fare better with the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, listening to you about your journey in writing this, of course, COVID being a very specific thing, leaving that aside, I find a lot of familiarity. I mean, I am a retired bureaucrat, I've been through lots of things, and a lot of ideas, a lot of half-finished manuscripts. Now, first of all, I really admire you for that last push that you gave and finished it, because I have so many of them lying, sort of half done, half thought out. But anyway, my question is, you are now in a genre which is not so well developed in India. Of course, it is coming up, but then you have these international people that you named, Ladlam and all those people. Are you kind of modeling your futures on those kind of things, or are you being more modest and kind of looking at the Indian scene and thinking about your future writing and all that kind of thing? I don't know if I make sense to you.
No, absolutely. So again, right, for the first book, you'd be almost egoistical to say I'm willing to chase after these giants. But I genuinely believe now that there's no reason for us to concede this entire space to Western authors. There's so much that happens in our country that there's absolutely no reason why we can't produce global books from India about the work that our intelligence services do, if that's the genre one wants to write in. Now I think, having written the first one, with help from other people as well, with a lot more time and a lot more research, it's certainly possible to write a book that will appeal to people in the US, in the UK, wherever else these books are coming out of. It just needs to be twisted a little bit to give it slightly more global appeal, rather than being as India focused as this one was. If that is the ambition you step out with, then I want to try and make a global book happen, which actually I'm going to try and do with the second one. In the worst case we fail.
Also, if I may take a little more time, I am really fascinated by or thought about the science fiction field, because so much is happening suddenly with this JSW telescope out there, and completely Einstein theories and all getting upset. That there's a lot of scope for the imagination to run wild, and I wonder if there's a lot of this kind of writing going on in India at the moment. I don't know if you're aware of something like that. And there's also that link to Indian mythology with that which people are kind of following up on.
So like Neeta ma'am said, ma'am named one author that's writing in this space. I actually didn't know, and I don't know any other author that's writing in this space. But no reason why we can't write in the science fiction space. I think we can, we should. I think there's a lot happening in mythology. We're perhaps reaching a stage where too much is happening with Indian mythology. So I want to steer away. If I do build out a science fiction novel, I want to bring in the pyramids, I want to bring in the floods 12,000 years ago, maybe argue that humans are not endemic to Earth, and try and do stuff like that. But I really want to steer away from what everybody else has tried to do in the mythologies, basically.
Thank you.
I did want to say, sir, I do hope you finish those manuscripts.
I pray for that, actually.
Any more questions? Okay, I'm dying to ask one. Since you are so research oriented and I'm presuming detail oriented, given your background and your education, have you ever thought of doing a non-fiction book?
So I am debating it now for the book on sports that I was talking about, right? I think there are two interpretations possibly to that book. The problem is the non-fiction variety of it then requires me to name people and incidences which are likely to land me in jail.
That's the publisher's problem. Their legal department can do the legal check. You should probably look at non-fiction.
The legal check is only, so the lawyer, having been a lawyer, I tell you, no lawyer is going to say go ahead with a book that's naming real people or real incidents. It's impossible. The lawyer will always come back saying, isko dilute karo, naam badlo, change the circumstances, change the dates, make it as different as you possibly can, which then loses the entire meaning of being a non-fiction book. So I'm a little bit stuck there, which is why I'm leaning towards giving it a fictional interpretation. The problem there then is that only people inside the industry really understand what you're talking about. For everybody else, it's entertainment, but nobody has the context of what went on. But the sports industry is actually a nutty place, so there's a lot to be said for it. So let's see. I'm not clear yet, but I'm thinking it through.
It might just be a great idea.
Yes.
As a moderator, I don't know what Tarun thinks, but I can say so. And Tarun, more power to you. I just really respect the courage and the conviction with which you have dedicated yourself to this book. And you also speak very honestly and realistically. Thank you so much for just giving off yourself so generously. And more power to you and your, hopefully, a non-fiction book. I'm going to request Mr. Dipendra Rana, General Manager ITC Rajputana, to please come up and present a memento to our speaker for the evening, Tarun Mehrishi.
Another 12 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rana, and thank you once again, Tarun and Akriti. Can we please have a round of applause for both our speakers? God bless you both. Since all of you are familiar with the way Right Circle functions, one copy of the book per family. Tarun is here to sign, as well as ask. I mean, you can ask your searching questions. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them. Thank you once again for joining us.